The bullet struck the fence post 3 inches from where Kieran Keller's hand had been resting, and he never even flinched. He had stopped caring about death somewhere around the 4th month of silence, when the only sounds left in his world were wind, hoofbeats, and the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead. Now, in September of 1878, he lived on the edge of La Junta, Colorado, in a weathered cabin that sat alone like a grave marker against the vast prairie, and the weeks bled together without distinction or meaning. He had not spoken a complete sentence to another human being in 7 months. The last conversation he remembered having was with Tom Bradley, the ranch foreman who had fired him after the incident with the stampede. Kieran had tried to explain that the storm had come from nowhere, that no man could have predicted lightning would strike so close to the herd, but Bradley had not wanted explanations. He wanted someone to blame for the loss of 30 head of cattle, and Kieran, who had already lost his parents to cholera 2 years prior and his younger brother to a gunfight in Denver, had nothing left to fight with. So he took his bedroll, his horse, and what little money he had saved, and he rode until he found this cabin, abandoned by some homesteader who had given up on making the land yield anything but dust and disappointment. The silence had felt like relief at first. No more orders barked at dawn, no more ribald jokes around the campfire that he had to pretend to find amusing, no more questions about why he always looked so sad. But relief had curdled into something else, something that made his tongue feel thick and useless in his mouth, something that made him wonder if he still remembered how to form words at all. He tested himself sometimes, whispering his own name in the dark, just to make sure his voice still worked. It always sounded strange to his ears, like it belonged to someone else entirely. Kieran was 26 years old, tall and lean with dark hair that had grown too long and a face that might have been handsome if it ever showed any expression beyond tired resignation. His eyes were gray, the color of storm clouds, and they had the look of someone who had seen too much and felt too little. He worked odd jobs when he needed money, mostly breaking horses for ranchers who were willing to pay cash and ask no questions. The work suited him because horses did not require conversation. They understood pressure and release, patience and consistency, and they did not care if you had not spoken in months. They only cared what you did, not what you said. On the morning everything changed, Kieran was walking back from the creek with 2 buckets of water, watching the sun turn the prairie grass gold, when he saw the wagon. It was listing badly to one side, clearly suffering from a broken wheel, and it sat in the middle of the road about half a mile from his cabin like a ship run aground. He stopped walking and considered simply turning around, going back to his cabin, pretending he had seen nothing. It was what he wanted to do, what every fiber of his being urged him to do, because getting involved meant talking, and talking meant remembering he was human, and remembering he was human meant feeling all the things he had worked so hard to bury. But even as he thought about walking away, his feet were already carrying him forward. Some part of him, some stubborn remnant of the person he used to be, would not let him leave someone stranded on the prairie. The sun was already climbing toward noon, and the September heat was building, and whoever was in that wagon would be in serious trouble by nightfall if the wheel was not fixed. As he got closer, he saw her. She was standing beside the wagon, hands on her hips, staring down at the broken wheel with an expression of profound frustration. She wore a traveling dress the color of sage, dusty from the road, and her dark blonde hair was coming loose from its pins, curling in the heat. She looked to be in her early 20s, and even from a distance, Kieran could see the determination in the set of her shoulders. She was not crying or wringing her hands or any of the things he might have expected. She was studying the wheel like it was a problem she could solve through sheer force of will. He cleared his throat as he approached, and the sound came out rough, almost painful. She spun around, eyes wide, one hand flying to her chest. Her eyes were green, he noticed, bright and clear despite the dust and heat. She looked at him for a long moment, taking in his weathered appearance, the buckets of water in his hands, the cabin visible in the distance behind him. "Oh, thank God," she said, and her voice was like music after 7 months of silence. It was warm and real and utterly human, and it struck something in Kieran's chest that he thought had gone completely numb. "I was beginning to think I would have to walk to town, and I have absolutely no idea how far that is. Can you help me? The wheel broke about an hour ago, and I have been trying to figure out how to fix it, but I think I need tools and I do not have the right ones. My name is Clara Garrett, and I am trying to get to La Junta. I am supposed to start teaching at the school there in 2 days, and if I do not arrive on time, they might give the position to someone else, and I came all the way from Pennsylvania, so that would be quite terrible, honestly." She said all of this in one breath, words tumbling over each other, and Kieran realized she was nervous, maybe even frightened, though she was doing an admirable job of hiding it. He set down his buckets and moved closer to examine the wheel. The hub had cracked, probably from hitting a rock or a deep rut, and one of the spokes had splintered completely. It was fixable, but it would take time and effort. "I can fix it," he said, and his voice came out hoarse and strange. He had to clear his throat again. "Got tools in my cabin. Take a few hours." Clara's whole face brightened, relief washing over her features. "Really? Oh, that would be wonderful. I cannot tell you how grateful I am. I was beginning to think I would be stuck out here indefinitely. Do you live nearby?" He pointed to his cabin, visible as a dark smudge against the horizon. She squinted in that direction, then looked back at him, studying his face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. He was not used to being looked at anymore, not used to being seen. "You are very kind to help me," she said softly. "May I know your name?" "Kieran Keller," he managed. Even saying his own name felt strange, like he was introducing himself to himself after a long absence. "Well, Mr. Keller, I truly appreciate your assistance. I would offer to pay you, but I am afraid my funds are quite limited. I spent most of what I had on the journey here." He shook his head, already turning back toward his cabin to get his tools. "No charge," he said, "just neighborly." The word felt foreign in his mouth, but it was the right word, the kind of word his mother would have used. His mother, who had always insisted that people had to look out for each other because the world was hard enough without adding cruelty to it. She had died believing that, even as the cholera had racked her body with pain. His father had gone 2 days later, and Kieran had buried them both on a hillside outside of Pueblo, marking their graves with wooden crosses that had probably rotted away by now. He walked back to his cabin, moving quickly, trying not to think about the fact that there was now another person in his small, silent world. He gathered his tools, along with a spare piece of wood that he thought might work for the broken spoke, and a canteen of water. When he returned to the wagon, Clara was sitting in the shade beneath it, fanning herself with her hand. She looked up as he approached, and her expression was grateful but also curious, like she was trying to figure something out. "How long have you lived out here?" she asked as he began working on the wheel. "It seems quite isolated." "Few months," he said, focusing on the wheel. The less he had to look at her, the easier this would be. "Do you like it? The solitude, I mean." He did not know how to answer that. Did he like it? Like seemed like the wrong word. It was what he had needed, what he had chosen, but that did not necessarily mean he liked it. "It is quiet," he finally said. "Yes, I imagine it is." She was silent for a moment, watching him work. I grew up in Philadelphia, so this is all quite new to me. The space, I mean. You can see for miles and miles, and there is nothing to interrupt the view. No buildings, no crowds, no noise. It is beautiful, but also a little frightening, if I am honest. Kieran did not respond, did not know what to say to that. He removed the broken spoke carefully, measuring the replacement piece against it. The sun beat down on his back, and sweat began to soak through his shirt. Clara continued talking, her voice filling the space between them like water filling an empty vessel. "My mother thought I was insane to come out here," she said. "She wanted me to marry a banker named Frederick Morton, who is very respectable and very boring, and who once spent an entire dinner explaining the proper way to organize a ledger. Can you imagine anything duller? I told her I would rather teach children in Colorado than spend my life pretending to be interested in ledgers, and she said I would regret it. Maybe I will. But at least I will have tried something different, you know. At least I will have seen something beyond the same streets I have walked my entire life." There was something in her voice, a yearning that Kieran recognized because he had felt it once too, before life had beaten it out of him. She wanted adventure, wanted meaning, wanted to believe the world held more than the small corner she had been born into. He had wanted those things too, once. Now he just wanted peace, and most days he was not even sure he wanted that. He worked steadily, replacing the spoke, reinforcing the hub with strips of leather soaked in water that would tighten as they dried. It was delicate work, requiring focus, and he was grateful for the excuse not to talk. But Clara seemed content to fill the silence herself, telling him about her journey west, about the train ride and the stagecoach, and the final stretch in this wagon she had purchased in Dodge City from a man who swore it was sound. "Clearly his definition of sound differs from mine," she said with a laugh that was surprisingly unforced given her situation. "But I suppose I cannot complain too much. It got me this far, and now I have met a kind neighbor who is willing to help. My mother always said I was too trusting, that I assumed the best of people when I should be more cautious. But I think if you go through life expecting the worst, you miss the moments when people surprise you with their goodness." Kieran glanced at her, unable to help himself, and found her looking directly at him. Her eyes were serious now, searching his face like she could read his whole story there. He looked away quickly, focusing back on the wheel. "You do not talk much, do you, Mr. Keller?" "No," he admitted. "That is all right," she said gently. "I talk enough for both of us, as you have probably noticed. My students are going to get quite tired of my voice by the end of the first week, but I believe in conversation. I believe in words. They are how we make sense of the world, how we connect to each other. Silence can be peaceful, but too much of it can also be a kind of prison. Do you not think?" Her words struck him with unexpected force, like she had reached inside his chest and grabbed hold of something he had been trying to ignore. She was right. The silence had become a prison, walls he had built around himself brick by brick, day by day, until he could barely remember what it felt like to exist any other way. But admitting that meant acknowledging how much he had lost, and he was not sure he had the strength for that. "Maybe," he said quietly. The sun climbed higher, and he worked through the worst of the afternoon heat, stopping only to drink water and wipe the sweat from his face. Clara moved to sit in the wagon bed, where there was more shade, and continued talking. She told him about the school in La Junta, about the 12 students she would be teaching, about the little house the town had arranged for her to live in. She told him about books she loved, about her father who had died when she was 14, about her younger sister who was getting married in the spring. She asked him questions too, gentle ones that did not demand long answers, and slowly, painfully, he found himself responding. Yes, he had grown up in Colorado. No, he had no family left. Yes, he knew how to break horses. No, he did not miss working on a big ranch. Each answer felt like lifting a heavy stone, but Clara seemed to understand. She did not push, did not demand more than he could give. She just kept talking, her words weaving a net of normalcy around them, until Kieran realized with surprise that he was almost comfortable. By late afternoon, the wheel was fixed. He tested it carefully, making sure the repair would hold, then helped Clara climb up onto the wagon seat. She gathered the reins, looking down at him with an expression that was both grateful and something else, something softer. "Thank you, Mr. Keller," she said. "You saved me today. I mean that quite literally. If you had not helped me, I do not know what I would have done." "You would have figured something out," he said, and he believed it. She had that quality about her, that stubborn resilience that suggested she would find a way through whatever life threw at her. She smiled at him, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Perhaps, but I am glad I did not have to. La Junta is just a few miles from here, is it not? Will you come visit me sometime? I would like to repay your kindness, and besides, I think you could use a friend." The word friend hung in the air between them, foreign and frightening and strangely appealing. Kieran wanted to say no, wanted to retreat back to his cabin and his silence and his careful isolation. But looking up at Clara, at the hope in her face, he found himself nodding instead. "Maybe," he said. "I will take maybe," she said. "The school is on First Street, right in the center of town. You cannot miss it. Come by whenever you like, I mean that." She hesitated, then added more softly, "I think we both might need words more than we realize." Then she snapped the reins and the wagon lurched forward, the repaired wheel holding steady. Kieran watched her go, standing in the middle of the road until the wagon was just a speck in the distance. Then he picked up his tools and walked back to his cabin, and for the first time in 7 months, the silence felt different. It felt like absence instead of peace, like something missing rather than something chosen. That night, lying in his narrow bed, he thought about Clara's words, about conversation and connection, and the way silence could become a prison. He thought about how his voice had sounded, rusty and rough, and how it had gotten easier to talk as the afternoon wore on, like he was remembering a skill he had thought he lost. He thought about green eyes and a smile that had seemed genuinely glad to see him, even though he was just a stranger who happened to live near where her wagon broke down. And he thought about the fact that he had said maybe when she asked if he would visit, and maybe was not the same as no, and that alone felt like a small revolution. 3 days passed before Kieran rode into La Junta. He told himself he was going for supplies, that he needed flour and coffee, and that this had nothing to do with Clara Garrett. But he also washed his face and shaved and put on his cleanest shirt, so he knew he was lying to himself. The town was small, just a collection of buildings clustered around the railroad tracks, but it had a surprising amount of activity. Freight wagons rumbled past, men conducted business on the wooden sidewalks, and somewhere a hammer rang against an anvil in steady rhythm. He found the school easily, just as Clara had said. It was a simple wooden building painted white, with windows on all sides to let in light. Through one of those windows, he could see Clara standing at the front of the classroom, gesturing animatedly as she spoke to a group of children. He watched for a moment, struck by how alive she looked, how passionate. She was teaching them something about geography, pointing to a map on the wall, and the children were leaning forward in their seats, completely focused on her. He waited until he saw the children start to file out, released for the day, before he approached the school. Clara appeared in the doorway, shaking hands with a few parents who had come to collect their children, smiling and chatting easily. Then she looked up and saw him, and her whole face lit up with pleasure. "Mr. Keller," she called out, waving. "You came. I was hoping you would." He dismounted and walked over to her, suddenly uncertain. "Did not mean to interrupt," he said. "You are not interrupting at all. I just finished for the day." She glanced at the sky where the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. "Have you eaten? There is a restaurant just down the street, nothing fancy, but the food is decent. Would you join me for supper? My treat, as a thank you for helping me." He wanted to say no, wanted to make some excuse and ride back to his cabin where things were simple and safe. But he also wanted to hear her voice again, wanted to sit across from her and listen to her talk about her day, and that wanting was stronger than his fear. "All right," he said. The restaurant was called the Golden Eagle, and it was crowded with railroad workers and ranch hands and local businessmen. Clara led him to a table near the window, and they sat down across from each other. She ordered pot roast, and he did the same, and then there was a moment of silence where they just looked at each other. "I am glad you came," Clara said finally. "I have been thinking about you, wondering if you were all right out there in your cabin all alone." "I am fine," he said automatically. She studied him with those clear green eyes. "Are you? Truly?" No one had asked him that in longer than he could remember, and the question caught him off guard. He could lie, could give her the answer she probably wanted to hear, but something in her expression suggested she would know if he did. "I do not know," he said honestly. "I have been alone so long I am not sure I remember what fine feels like." "Will you tell me about it?" she asked gently. "About why you are out there by yourself. You do not have to, but sometimes talking helps." So he told her. Haltingly at first, then with increasing ease, he told her about his parents dying, about his brother getting shot in a stupid argument over a card game, about the stampede and losing his job, and deciding he was done with people and their cruelty and their carelessness. He told her about the first few weeks in the cabin, when the silence had felt like a blessing, and about how it had slowly changed into something else, something that felt like drowning. He told her things he had never told anyone, things he had barely admitted to himself, and she listened without interrupting, her eyes full of compassion. When he finished, she reached across the table and briefly touched his hand. The contact was light, almost tentative, but it sent a shock through him. He could not remember the last time someone had touched him with kindness. "I am so sorry," she said. "That is too much loss for anyone to carry alone, but you are not alone anymore, Kieran, not if you do not want to be." She had used his first name without asking permission, and somehow that felt right. He looked at her across the table, at the earnestness in her face, and felt something shift inside him, some wall beginning to crack, some frozen thing beginning to thaw. "Why do you care?" he asked. "You do not know me." "I know you helped me when you did not have to," she said. "I know you are kind even though life has not been kind to you, and I know what it is like to feel alone, even in a crowded room, maybe especially in a crowded room. I came out here because I wanted something different, wanted to matter somehow, and maybe helping you is part of how I can do that. Or maybe," she paused, a faint blush coloring her cheeks, "maybe I just like you and I want to know you better. Is that so strange?" "Yes," he said, but he was almost smiling. "Most people do not like me. I am not good company." "Well, I am not most people," she said with a spark of humor. "And I think you are better company than you give yourself credit for. You are just out of practice." They ate their supper, and Clara talked about her first few days of teaching, about the students and their personalities, about her struggles with the stove in her little house, and how she had nearly set her curtains on fire trying to cook breakfast. She made him laugh, actually laugh, and the sound felt strange coming out of his throat, but also good, like something that had been locked away too long finally being released. After supper, he walked her back to her house, a small cabin not unlike his own but situated right in town with neighbors on either side. She stood on her porch, looking at him in the fading light. "Will you come back?" she asked. "To visit, I mean. I would like to see you again." "Yes," he said, and this time there was no maybe, no hesitation. "I will come back." "Good," she said, smiling. "I will see you soon then, Kieran Keller." He rode home under a sky full of stars, and his chest felt lighter than it had in months. The silence of his cabin, when he reached it, no longer felt peaceful. It felt empty. And for the first time, emptiness felt like something he might want to fill. Over the following weeks, Kieran found himself riding into La Junta more and more often. At first he told himself he was just checking on Clara, making sure she was settling in all right. But the truth was simpler and more complicated than that. He wanted to see her. He wanted to hear her voice, wanted to watch the way her face lit up when she talked about her students or a book she was reading, wanted to feel like a person again, instead of a ghost haunting the edges of the world. Clara seemed to enjoy his visits, and she never made him feel like he was intruding. She would finish teaching for the day, and they would walk together through the town, or sit on her porch and talk, or sometimes just exist in comfortable silence while she graded papers, and he fixed things around her house that needed fixing. She drew him out with questions and stories, coaxing him back into the world of words and conversation, and he found that he had more to say than he had realized. He told her about breaking horses, about how you had to understand that horses were prey animals, always thinking about escape, always on edge. You could not force them, could not break their spirit without breaking something essential. You had to be patient, had to build trust slowly, had to show them that you would not hurt them. Clara had looked at him thoughtfully when he explained this and said, "That is true of people too, I think. We are all prey animals in our own way, always ready to run. Trust is everything." He told her about his parents, about how his mother had loved wildflowers and his father had played the fiddle, and how their cabin had always been full of music and laughter until the cholera came. He told her about his brother, Jacob, who had been 19 when he died, too young and too foolish to know that pride was not worth dying over. He told her about the guilt he carried, about feeling like he should have been able to save them all somehow, even though he knew logically that disease and bullets did not care about should. Clara told him about her life too. About growing up in Philadelphia, about her father who had been a teacher and had inspired her love of learning, about her mother who meant well, but had narrow ideas about what a woman should want. She told him about Frederick Morton and his ledgers, laughing at herself for ever considering marrying him, and about the moment she saw the advertisement for a teaching position in La Junta and knew, with absolute certainty, that she had to apply. "My mother said I was running away," Clara said one evening as they sat on her porch watching the sun set. "But I was not running away. I was running toward something, toward possibility, toward a life that felt like mine instead of one someone else planned for me. Does that make sense?" "Yes," Kieran said, because it did. He understood running toward and running away, understood the difference between them, even if his own journey had been more of the latter than the former. "What are you running toward now?" she asked, turning to look at him. "Or are you still running away?" He thought about that, about the cabin that had felt like refuge and now felt like exile, about the silence that had seemed like peace and had revealed itself as pain. He thought about how he felt when he was with Clara, like he was waking up from a long sleep, like colors were brighter and sounds were clearer, and everything mattered more. "I think I am starting to run toward," he said slowly. "I am just not sure toward what yet." She smiled, and in the dying light, she looked almost luminous. "You will figure it out," she said. "I have faith in you." It was October when Kieran realized he was falling in love with Clara Garrett, though probably he had been falling all along and just had not wanted to name it. They were riding out to a place she wanted to see, a spot along the Arkansas River where the trees turned gold and red in autumn. She had borrowed a horse from one of the families in town, and she rode well, keeping up with him easily as they followed the river west. When they reached the spot, they dismounted and stood at the edge of the water, watching the current flow past. The trees were brilliant with color, and the air smelled of earth and water and approaching winter. Clara walked along the riverbank, collecting colorful leaves, and Kieran watched her, feeling something expand in his chest, something warm and terrifying and undeniable. She came back to him holding a perfect red leaf, twirling it between her fingers. "Beautiful, is it not?" she said. "I want to press it in a book, save it for when winter comes and everything is gray." "You think ahead," he observed. "I suppose I do. My father used to say that half of being happy is making sure you have something to look forward to, so I collect things. Memories mostly, but also leaves and pretty stones and moments like this." She looked up at him, her eyes soft. "Thank you for bringing me here, Kieran. This is exactly what I needed." "I did not bring you," he said. "You asked to come. You said yes," she countered. "You could have said no. You could have told me you were too busy or that you did not want to, but you said yes, and that means something." He knew what she was really asking, what she was really saying. The air between them felt charged, heavy with words unsaid. He should say something, should tell her what he was feeling, but the words stuck in his throat. He had spent so long being silent, had built such high walls around himself, and even now, even with her, breaking through them felt impossibly hard. But Clara, as always, seemed to understand. She stepped closer to him, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her green eyes, close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she used. "Kieran," she said softly, "you know I care for you, do you not? You must know that." "Clara," he said, and her name felt precious in his mouth. "I am not a good bet. I am broke and angry, and I have been alone so long I am not sure I remember how to be with someone. You deserve better than that. You deserve someone whole." "I do not want someone else," she said firmly. "I want you, the you that is standing right here, right now. Not some imagined perfect version, just you." She reached up and touched his face, her hand warm against his cheek. "You are not broken, Kieran. You are hurt. There is a difference." Something in him shattered at those words, some last defense crumbling. He pulled her to him, wrapping his arms around her, and she came willingly, pressing her face against his chest. They stood there by the river, holding each other, and Kieran felt tears he had not cried for 2 years finally fall. Clara just held him tighter, not saying anything, just being there, solid and real and utterly present. When he finally pulled back, she looked up at him and smiled through her own tears. "There you are," she said gently. "I have been waiting to meet you." He kissed her then, because words were not enough, because he needed her to know what he felt, even if he could not say it yet. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, both of them learning the shape of each other. Then it deepened, and he felt Clara's hands fist in his shirt, felt her lean into him with a small sound that made his heart race. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she was grinning up at him with such joy that he could not help but grin back. "Well," she said, "that was worth waiting for." "I love you," he said, and the words came out easier than he expected, like they had been there all along, just waiting for permission. "I did not think I could feel this way again, but I do. I love you, Clara." "I love you too," she said, reaching up to kiss him again. "I have loved you since the day you fixed my wagon, I think, maybe even before that in some strange way, like I was waiting for you without knowing it." They spent the rest of the afternoon by the river, talking and kissing and planning a future that no longer felt impossible. Kieran told her about his fears, about how he was worried he would disappoint her, or fail her, or slip back into the person he had been when she found him. Clara listened, then took both his hands in hers. "You are not going to be perfect," she said. "Neither am I. We are going to argue and frustrate each other and have days where we wonder what we were thinking, but I would rather have that with you than perfection with anyone else. Do you understand? I choose you, Kieran Keller. All of you, including the parts you think are too broken to love." When they rode back to La Junta that evening, everything looked different. The town, which had seemed like just another place to Kieran, now felt like home because Clara was there. His cabin, which had been refuge and prison both, was just a building now, just a temporary stopping point. He knew, with certainty, that his life was about to change, and for the first time in years that change felt like possibility instead of loss. The courtship that followed was unconventional by the standards of La Junta society, but neither Kieran nor Clara cared much about what was considered proper. Clara was already viewed as slightly scandalous for being an unmarried woman who had traveled west alone, and Kieran had no reputation to protect. They spent as much time together as they could, walking through town or riding out to the prairie, talking about everything and nothing, learning the rhythms of each other's minds. Kieran began staying in town more often, renting a room above the general store so he did not have to make the long ride back to his cabin every night. He took more jobs, saving money now because he had a reason to save, a future he could picture. He worked as a ranch hand when they needed extra help, broke horses for cash, even helped build an addition onto the church when the congregation decided they needed more space. Clara taught during the day and spent her evenings with Kieran, and she bloomed under the attention and the love. She wrote letters to her mother and sister, telling them about the man she had met, and while her mother's responses were skeptical at first, even she eventually came around when Clara's happiness shone through every word. In December, on a cold evening when snow was just starting to fall, Kieran asked Clara to marry him. They were in her little house, sitting by the fire, and he had been trying all evening to find the right words. Finally, he just pulled out the ring he had bought, a simple gold band with a small garnet stone, and held it out to her. "I know I am not much," he said, "but I am better with you than I ever was alone. Will you marry me, Clara? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you?" Clara took the ring with shaking hands, tears streaming down her face. "You already deserve me," she said. "And yes, yes, of course I will marry you. I cannot think of anything I want more." He slipped the ring on her finger, and she threw her arms around his neck, laughing and crying at the same time. They kissed until they were both breathless, until the fire had burned down to embers, and then they sat together in the warm darkness, planning their wedding and their life together. They were married in February of 1879, in the little church in La Junta with half the town in attendance. Clara wore a dress she had altered herself, cream-colored silk with lace at the collar and cuffs, and she carried a bouquet of dried wildflowers that Kieran had saved from the previous summer, remembering what she said about her mother loving them. Kieran wore a new suit, the first suit he had ever owned, and his hands shook as he said his vows. But his voice was steady when he promised to love her, to honor her, to stand by her through whatever life brought them. And Clara's voice was strong and clear when she promised the same. They sealed their promises with a kiss that drew cheers from the assembled guests. And then they walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, grinning at each other like they had just pulled off the greatest trick in the world. The town had a celebration for them at the Golden Eagle, with food and music and dancing. Kieran, who had never been much of a dancer, let Clara teach him the steps, stumbling through a waltz while she laughed and encouraged him. He looked around at the people clapping and smiling, at the warmth and the joy, and he thought about how different this was from the lonely cabin and the long silence. He thought about how close he had come to missing all of this, how close he had come to choosing isolation forever. "What are you thinking?" Clara asked, her hand warm in his as they moved across the floor. "I am thinking I am the luckiest man alive," he said. "I am thinking you saved me." "We saved each other," she corrected gently. "That is what love does, Kieran. It does not save one person, it saves both." They spent their wedding night in the little house that would now be their home together, and it was awkward and sweet and perfect in the way first times are. Clara was patient with Kieran's nervousness, guiding him with gentle hands and soft words, and he was careful with her, reverent, amazed that she had chosen him, that this was real. Afterward, lying tangled together in the narrow bed, Clara traced patterns on his chest with her fingertips. "I love you," she murmured. "I will never get tired of saying it." "I love you too," he said, and it was easier every time, the words flowing more naturally, like a language he was finally learning to speak fluently. "Thank you for not giving up on me." "Thank you for letting me in," she replied, then yawned. "We should sleep. Tomorrow we can start figuring out our life together." "I already know what I want," Kieran said. "I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to hear your voice. I want to remember every single day how much I need words, your words, us talking to each other." Clara smiled, her eyes already drifting closed. "That sounds perfect," she whispered. "That sounds like exactly the right life." Spring came, and with it came changes. Kieran sold his isolated cabin, finally ready to let go of that part of his life. He used the money to buy a small piece of land on the edge of La Junta, and with help from men in town who had become friends, he built a proper house for Clara and himself. It had 3 bedrooms because Clara wanted children, and a large kitchen, because she was determined to learn to cook properly despite her many mishaps. It had a porch that faced east so they could watch the sunrise, and a garden plot where Clara planned to grow vegetables and flowers. They moved in during May, and Clara immediately set about making the house a home. She hung curtains she had sewn herself, arranged their few pieces of furniture, and planted seeds in the garden with optimistic determination. Kieran built her bookshelves for the growing collection of books she ordered from catalogs, and he built a desk where she could work on her lesson plans. Life settled into a rhythm that felt both ordinary and miraculous. Clara taught during the school year, and Kieran continued to break horses and take ranch work. They saved money carefully, planning for the future, talking late into the night about their dreams and hopes. They argued sometimes about small things mostly, like whether to buy chickens or how to arrange the furniture, but they always talked it through, always found their way back to understanding. In October, Clara told him she was pregnant, and Kieran felt a joy so intense it almost frightened him. He had never imagined being a father, had never thought his life would hold this kind of happiness. But Clara was glowing with excitement, planning and preparing, and her joy was infectious. Their son was born in June of 1880, during a thunderstorm that rattled the windows and drummed on the roof. Kieran held Clara's hand through the long hours of labor, feeling helpless and terrified, but Clara was strong, stronger than he had ever imagined. When the baby finally came, wailing and red-faced and perfect, the midwife placed him in Clara's arms, and Kieran looked at his wife and son and felt his heart expand beyond what he thought it could hold. "What should we name him?" Clara asked, her voice exhausted but happy. "You choose," Kieran said, unable to take his eyes off the baby. "You did all the hard work." "James," Clara said softly, "after my father, James Keller, what do you think?" "I think it is perfect," Kieran said. "I think everything is perfect." James was a good baby, curious and alert, with his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. Kieran, who had been worried he would not know how to be a father, found that love made it easier than he had expected. He held James for hours, walking the floor when the baby was fussy, singing the songs his own father had sung to him, songs he had not remembered until he needed them. Clara continued teaching, though she took the first few months off to stay home with James. The town mothers took turns helping out, bringing food and advice, and Clara navigated new motherhood with the same determined optimism she brought to everything. Kieran watched her with their son, saw the tenderness and patience she showed, and fell in love with her all over again. As James grew from infant to toddler, the house filled with laughter and noise and the particular chaos that comes with small children. Kieran, who had once lived in silence, now found himself surrounded by sound, James's babbling and Clara's singing and the constant conversation that flowed between all of them. And he loved it, every moment of it. Even the hard moments, the sleepless nights and the teething and the tantrums, felt precious because they were part of this life he had built with Clara when James was 2. Clara became pregnant again, and this time she was less nervous, more confident. Their daughter was born in March of 1883, arriving quickly on a cold morning while James slept in the next room. They named her Emma, and she had her father's gray eyes and her mother's smile, and she was spoiled from her first breath by her brother who declared her the best baby in the whole world. The years passed in a blur of school years and harvest seasons, of birthdays and holidays and ordinary days that strung together into a life. Kieran continued to work, building a reputation as one of the best horse trainers in the region. Clara taught, shaping young minds, becoming a beloved fixture in the community. They raised their children with love and discipline, teaching them to value words and honesty and kindness. James grew into a thoughtful boy who loved books like his mother and had a gift with animals like his father. Emma was bold and fearless, always climbing trees and getting into mischief, keeping them on their toes. Together, they filled the house with energy and joy, and Kieran sometimes had to stop and remind himself that this was his life, that he had not lost everything, that he had somehow found his way to more than he had ever hoped for. On quiet evenings, after the children were in bed, Kieran and Clara would sit on their porch and talk, continuing the conversation they had started that day by her broken wagon. They talked about everything, their days and their worries and their hopes for the future, and sometimes about the past. "Do you ever think about how close we came to missing each other?" Clara asked one night, her head resting on his shoulder. "If my wagon wheel had not broken in that exact spot, if you had decided not to help me, if I had not convinced you to come visit me in town." So many small things that had to go exactly right. "I think about it all the time," Kieran admitted. "I think about who I would be now if you had not arrived that day. Still alone in that cabin, probably, still silent, still convincing myself that isolation was the same as peace." "You would have figured it out eventually," Clara said. "You are too strong to have stayed lost forever." "Maybe," Kieran said, "but I am glad I did not have to figure it out alone. You gave me back words, Clara. You gave me back my voice. You reminded me that I needed them, that I needed connection and conversation and love. Everything I have now, everything I am started with you." "It started with us," Clara corrected, tilting her head to look at him. "You chose to help me. You chose to come to town. You chose to let me in." "Those were your decisions, Kieran. I may have been the catalyst, but you did the work." "Then I am grateful we both chose right," he said, kissing her forehead. "I am grateful for every word we have said to each other and all the words we have yet to say." "That is very poetic for a former silent cowboy," Clara teased. "I learned from the best, he replied, pulling her closer. "A very talkative teacher who would not let me stay quiet." They sat there in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that comes not from absence but from complete understanding. Around them, the night was alive with sound, crickets and distant coyotes, and the wind in the trees. Inside the house, their children slept peacefully, dreaming whatever dreams children dream. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. James started helping his father with the horses, showing a natural talent that made Kieran proud. Emma started school under her mother's tutelage, proving to be bright and eager to learn. The family grew deeper roots in La Junta, becoming part of the fabric of the community. In 1887, when James was 7 and Emma was 4, Clara gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Thomas and Sarah. The house became even more chaotic, even more full of life, and Kieran found himself stretched thin sometimes, working to provide for his growing family. But he never complained, never wished for the simpler days of silence. He remembered too well what that silence had cost him. Clara had to stop teaching to manage the household and care for 4 young children, and sometimes Kieran saw a wistfulness in her eyes, a longing for the classroom. So he made arrangements with neighboring women, working out a system where Clara could still teach a few days a week, and the joy that returned to her face made all the extra effort worth it. They built additions onto the house as the children grew, adding rooms and space. The garden flourished under Clara's care, providing vegetables for their table and flowers for her to press in books. Kieran built a workshop where he could repair tack and saddles during the winter months. The land that had seemed generous when they bought it now felt perfectly sized for their life. The children grew and changed, each developing their own personalities. James became quieter as he got older, thoughtful and careful like his father. Emma remained bold, always ready to argue her point and stand her ground. Thomas was gentle and artistic, always drawing and making up stories. Sarah was musical, singing constantly, her voice filling the house with melody. Kieran and Clara navigated parenthood together, making mistakes and learning as they went, but always coming back to the foundation of love and communication they had built. They made sure to talk to their children, to really talk, teaching them the value of words and honesty and expressing emotions. Kieran never wanted his children to feel the kind of isolation he had experienced, never wanted them to believe that silence was safer than speaking. When James turned 16, in 1896, he told his father he wanted to work with horses professionally, not just helping out but truly learning the trade. Kieran felt a swell of pride and began teaching his son everything he knew, all the patience and techniques he had developed over years of work. They spent long hours together, and Kieran found himself telling James stories about his life, about the hard times and the lonely years, and how Clara had saved him. "Love makes you brave," he told his son one day as they worked with a particularly skittish mare. "It gives you a reason to try harder to be better. Before your mother, I had given up on trying. I had decided it was easier to be alone, but she would not let me stay there. She reminded me that being human means connecting with other humans, talking to them, sharing your life with them. Do not ever forget that, James. Do not ever think you are better off alone." "I will not, Pa," James said seriously. "I see how you and Ma are together. I want that someday. Someone who understands me like she understands you. You will find it," Kieran assured him. "Just do not give up, even when things get hard. Especially when things get hard." Emma, at 13, was already talking about leaving La Junta someday, seeing more of the world, having adventures. She reminded Kieran so much of Clara at that age, full of dreams and determination. He worried about her sometimes, about her fearlessness. But Clara would just laugh and say Emma was exactly as she should be. The twins, at 9, were still young enough to be underfoot constantly, but Kieran cherished even their chaos. He remembered the silence too well to ever take their noise for granted. As the century drew to a close, Kieran found himself reflecting more on how far he had come. He was 47 years old now, no longer the lonely young man who had hidden away in a cabin. His face was lined, his hair was starting to gray, but his eyes were no longer empty. They were full of life and love and purpose. Clara, at 42, was still beautiful to him, maybe more so now than when they had first met. She moved through the world with confidence and grace, balancing her roles as mother, wife, and teacher with enviable skill. Her hair had some silver in it now, and laugh lines framed her eyes, but she was still the woman who had refused to let him stay silent, who had insisted he needed words and connection and love. On their 20th wedding anniversary in February of 1899, Kieran took Clara back to the spot on the Arkansas River where they had first admitted their love for each other. It was winter, the trees bare, the ground covered in snow, but it was still beautiful in its stark way. 20 years, Clara said, holding his hand as they stood by the frozen river. Can you believe it? Sometimes I still cannot believe any of it, Kieran admitted. That you chose me, that we built this life, that I have 4 children and a home and a reason to wake up every morning. It feels like a dream sometimes. It is real, Clara said firmly. Every bit of it. And we did it together, Kieran. We chose each other and we kept choosing each other every single day. Best choice I ever made, he said, pulling her close despite the cold. You gave me everything, Clara. My voice, my life, my family. Everything I have worth having came from you. You gave me just as much, she insisted. You gave me purpose and love and a life that is mine, not something someone else planned for me. You gave me 4 beautiful children and a partner who actually listens when I talk. Do you know how rare that is? Not rare enough, Kieran said, making her laugh. They stood together by the river. 2 people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something lasting from a chance encounter and a broken wagon wheel. The years had changed them both, had brought challenges and sorrows along with the joys. But through it all, they had kept talking to each other, had kept choosing connection over isolation, had kept remembering that words and love were what made life worth living. When they returned home, their children were waiting with a surprise celebration, the house decorated with ribbons and flowers despite the winter cold. There was a cake Emma had baked herself, slightly lopsided but made with love. There were drawings from Thomas and a song Sarah had composed. James gave a speech, thanking his parents for showing him what love looked like, for teaching him to value family above all else. Kieran stood there with Clara's hand in his, looking at the life they had created together, and felt overwhelming gratitude. He thought about the man he had been 21 years ago, silent and alone, and convinced he needed no one. That man seemed like a stranger now, someone from another life entirely. As the celebration continued around them, Clara leaned close to Kieran and whispered, "Happy anniversary, my love. Here is to 20 more years of talking." "And listening," Kieran added, kissing her temple. "I promise to never stop listening to you, Clara Keller. You are the best conversation I have ever had." The children groaned at the sentiment, but they were smiling, and the house filled with laughter and the sound of family. The best sound Kieran had ever heard. The years that followed brought the changes that time always brings. James married a young woman named Ruth from a neighboring ranch, and they built a house not far from Kieran and Clara's place, continuing the family tradition of working with horses. Emma, true to her word, left La Junta at 18 to attend a teacher's college in Denver, blazing her own trail just as her mother had done. She wrote letters full of excitement and stories, and Kieran and Clara read every word with pride and a touch of longing. Thomas discovered a talent for carpentry and apprenticed with a furniture maker in town, creating beautiful pieces that graced homes throughout the region. Sarah married young at 19 to a musician who shared her love of song, and they traveled with a performance troupe, bringing music to small towns across Colorado and beyond. Kieran and Clara became grandparents when James and Ruth had their first child in 1902, a boy they named Kieran in honor of his grandfather. Holding his namesake, Kieran felt the cycle completing, felt the continuity of family and love extending forward into the future. He thought about his own parents, gone so many years now, and hoped they would be proud of the life he had built, the family he had raised. Clara continued teaching well into her 60s, finally retiring in 1905 when her energy began to wane. The town held a celebration for her, honoring her decades of service, and dozens of former students came to thank her for the impact she had made on their lives. Kieran watched with pride as Clara smiled and hugged people, as she listened to their stories of how she had inspired them, how she had taught them to love learning. "You changed a lot of lives," he told her that night as they sat on their porch, the same porch where they had spent countless evenings over the years. "So did you," Clara replied. "Maybe not in a classroom, but everyone who knows you has been touched by your kindness and your strength. You taught them that it is possible to overcome pain, to choose connection over isolation. That matters, Kieran." They were in their 70s now, slowing down but still together, still talking every day, still finding new things to say to each other after more than 3 decades of marriage. Their children and grandchildren visited regularly, filling the house with noise and life. But Kieran still treasured the quiet moments with Clara best, the times when it was just the two of them, continuing the conversation they had started so long ago. In the summer of 1910, they traveled back east so Clara could see her mother one last time before she passed. The journey was long and exhausting, but important. Clara had maintained a correspondence with her family over the years, healing old wounds, building bridges. Her mother, in her 90s now, took Kieran's hand with her frail one and said, "Thank you for making my daughter happy. I was wrong about you, about everything. You gave her exactly the life she needed." "She gave me mine," Kieran replied simply. When they returned to La Junta, both felt the weight of their years more heavily. They were slowing down, their bodies no longer obeying them quite as reliably as they once had. But their minds were still sharp, their love still strong, their commitment to each other still unwavering. On a warm evening in May of 1912, 33 years after they had married, Kieran and Clara sat on their porch watching the sun set over the prairie. The house behind them was quiet, their children grown and gone, living their own lives. James lived nearby and visited often. Emma had returned to Colorado and taught in Denver, bringing her own children to visit in the summers. Thomas had his carpentry shop in town. Sarah sent letters from wherever her musical travels took her, always promising to visit soon. "You remember the day we met?" Clara asked, her voice softer now with age but still the same voice Kieran had fallen in love with. "Every detail," Kieran said. "You were standing by that broken wagon, looking so determined, I almost walked away. Almost decided helping you was too much trouble. What made you stop?" Clara asked, even though she had heard the story many times. "I do not know," Kieran admitted. "Maybe some part of me knew I needed you even then. Maybe I was not quite as lost as I thought. Or maybe it was just luck, fate, whatever you want to call it, but I am grateful I stopped." I am grateful for every moment since then." "Me too," Clara said, reaching for his hand. Their fingers intertwined, the gesture as natural as breathing after so many years. "You know what I remember most about that day? How surprised you looked when I kept talking. Like you had forgotten what conversation sounded like." "I had," Kieran said. "7 months of silence does that to a person. You gave me my words back, Clara. You reminded me I needed them." "We gave them back to each other," Clara corrected, as she always did. "That is what we do. We remind each other who we are, what we need, what matters. That is what love is." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the colors change in the sky, orange fading to pink, fading to purple. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called and another answered. The prairie stretched out before them, vast and beautiful, the same prairie where Kieran had once hidden himself away, convinced he needed no one. "I love you," Clara said suddenly. "I will never stop saying it." "I love you too," Kieran replied, raising her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. "Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for all the words. Thank you for listening to them," Clara said, smiling at him in the gathering darkness. "Thank you for remembering how much you needed them." They sat together as the stars came out one by one, two people who had found each other in a harsh land and built something beautiful together. They had raised children who were now raising their own children. They had created a legacy of love and communication and connection that would ripple forward through generations. As Kieran looked at his wife in the starlight, he thought about the lonely cowboy he had been, silent and isolated, convinced he was better off alone. That man was gone now, replaced by someone who understood that words were not just sounds. They were bridges between souls. They were how you told someone you loved them, how you shared your fears and hopes and dreams. They were how you built a life with another person, one conversation at a time. The years continued to pass gently. Kieran and Clara grew older together, their steps slower but their commitment to each other never wavering. They were blessed to see grandchildren grow and even to hold great-grandchildren, the family tree they had planted together spreading its branches wide. They spent their days in simple pleasures, tending the garden, reading together, sitting on the porch and watching the world go by, and always talking. They talked about everything and nothing, their voices weaving together in the easy rhythm of decades shared. They talked about the past, remembering with fondness and sometimes with tears. They talked about the present, discussing their children and grandchildren and the changes coming to the world. And they talked about the future, the one beyond them, expressing hope that what they had built would endure. In the spring of 1916, Clara fell ill with pneumonia. Kieran sat by her bedside day and night, holding her hand, talking to her even when she was too weak to respond. He told her stories of their life together, reminded her of the day they met, of their wedding, of the births of their children. He told her how much he loved her, how grateful he was for every day they had shared. Clara recovered, though she was weakened by the illness. The doctor warned that she needed to take things easy, to rest more. Kieran made sure she did, fussing over her in a way that made her laugh even as she protested she was fine. "You are taking care of me the way I took care of you all those years ago," she observed one day as he brought her tea and tucked a blanket around her. "You have been taking care of me for 37 years, Kieran replied. "It is past time I return the favor." "We take care of each other," Clara said, the familiar refrain. "That is what we do." She regained much of her strength over the summer, and they had a few more good years, precious time they both knew to treasure. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1919 with all their children and grandchildren gathered around them, a celebration of love and family and the life they had built together. Kieran was 67 and Clara was 62, and they both knew they were in the final chapter of their story. But it was a good chapter, full of love and family and the satisfaction of a life well lived. They had no regrets, no wishes for things to have been different. They had chosen each other, and that choice had led to everything beautiful in their lives. On a quiet evening in November of 1920, they sat on their porch wrapped in blankets against the cold, watching the first snow of the season begin to fall. The prairie was transforming before their eyes, white softness covering the brown grass, erasing the edges of things. "It is beautiful," Clara said softly. "Every year I think I will get tired of winter, and every year the first snow reminds me how lovely it can be." "Like you," Kieran said. "Beautiful every time I look at you, even after all these years." "Flatterer," Clara said, but she was smiling. "Do you think we did all right, Kieran? With our life, I mean. Do you think we made good choices, the best choices?" Kieran said firmly. "We chose love over loneliness, connection over isolation, words over silence. We raised good children who are raising good children. We built something that will last beyond us. I do not think anyone could ask for more than that." "No," Clara agreed. "I suppose not." She was quiet for a moment, watching the snow fall, then added, "I want you to know something. If I had to do it all over again, knowing everything that would happen, every hard moment and every joy, I would still get in that wagon. I would still break that wheel. I would still drive past your cabin and hope you would help me. Because every road, every choice led me to you, and you are the best thing that ever happened to me." Kieran felt tears in his eyes, not from sadness but from the overwhelming fullness of love. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me too," he said. "You saved me, Clara. In every way a person can be saved. You gave me words when I had forgotten how to speak. You gave me love when I thought I did not deserve it. You gave me a family and a purpose and a reason to wake up every morning. Everything I am, everything good in my life comes from you. From us," Clara whispered. "It comes from us together." They sat holding hands as the snow fell around them, two people who had found each other against all odds and had made a life more beautiful than either had dreamed possible. Behind them, the house stood warm and solid, full of memories and love. Around them, the prairie stretched vast and eternal, the same land where Kieran had once been lost and where Clara had found him. The snow continued to fall, gentle and quiet, covering the world in white. And on the porch, Kieran and Clara sat together, still talking, still sharing words, still living the promise they had made to each other so many years ago. To remember always how much they needed words, needed each other, needed love. Their story had begun with silence and a broken wagon wheel, with a lonely cowboy who had forgotten how to speak, and a determined woman who would not let him stay silent. It had unfolded over decades, through joy and sorrow, through the raising of children and the building of a life. And now, in the gentle snowfall of a November evening, with their hands clasped and their hearts full, their story continued, a testament to the power of love, the importance of words, and the courage it takes to let another person truly see you. They would have a few more years together, precious time that neither took for granted. But even when their story finally ended, as all stories must, what they had built would endure. In their children and grandchildren, in the love they had modeled, in the lessons they had taught about the importance of communication and connection, their legacy would live on. For now, though, they simply sat together in the falling snow, two people who had saved each other, who had chosen each other every day for 41 years, and would continue choosing each other for as long as they had. The lonely cowboy and the woman who had reminded him how much he needed words, still talking, still loving, still living their beautiful, ordinary, miraculous life together. And that was more than enough. That was everything.